Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the latest webinar from the National Youth Agency on our COVID-19 guidance. I'll put my camera on and you can briefly see me. My name is Lee Middleton. I am the Chief Executive of the National Youth Agency, and I'm going to walk you through everything this afternoon as best I can and talk you through what's changing, what's happening as a result of this new third national lockdown. This lockdown is slightly different for us than the November lockdown, and that has a key implication. But I'm going to walk you through all the bits and pieces that you need to do. I'm joined in the background. My colleague, our Director of Youth Work, Abby McLatchy, is with us, and Abby is going to be taking all your questions, collating them all up, and then at the end we will do a Q&A. I would encourage you all to stay on the video until the end. I've watched the previous ones we've done, and the statistics, everyone drops off after a period of time. Do stay for the questions. There's lots of information and detail that we're able to give as part of the question process, which I'm sure you'll all welcome. And also please stay for the end of the slides, because there's some slides towards the end which are just as important as the ones at the beginning. So that's a sort of a request from myself. In the background, we've got Alex and Laura, our brilliant comms team, supporting us, and in our office, the team are already, I know, taking phone calls from the sector. Please don't ring us. It's not the best way to get help from us. If you need further information following today's webinar, please drop us an email via our guidance@nya.org.uk email address, and one of us will get back to you within a couple of days, as quick as we can. We normally do it as fast as possible. So let me move us on and just say you can keep in contact with the NYA through all our usual channels, and it's useful to subscribe to multiple ones of them, I would say to you. So if you're on Twitter or Facebook, sign up to the NYA's Facebook page. It's where we do post information, and we'll keep you up to date with all the kind of key information that you need. In terms of, it went the wrong way, let's go the other way. In terms of YouTube, while you're here, just take a second to go and subscribe to the NYA's YouTube channel, give us a thumbs up and like and share, and so that people see what we're doing, and you will always be therefore the first to know when things come out from the NYA through our YouTube channel. We put a lot of content out, or more to come this year in terms of video content, so it's well worth staying in contact with that and keeping an eye on that. So yeah, while you're watching, just go and click us and subscribe to us. That will be amazing. Thank you very much. I just want to point out that on our website, you can access our NYA network. One of the questions I've been asked quite a lot recently is how can organisations or individuals join the NYA? How can you sign up, in a sense? And we don't have a membership in the traditional sense, because we are here for all of you. We're here for the whole of the youth sector, and it doesn't matter which part of the system you're part of, whether you're in the uniform sector or a local authority or the voluntary youth sector. The NYA is here to support everybody. So we don't have a paid or subscription service, but you can register on the NYA network. If you go to our website, and up on the top corner, you'll see this thing called member area. And if you click on there, you can just fill in your email address and your name, and it will register you for receiving all the information from us. It'll also give you access to all the resource library from the organisation, all our quality stuff, a lot of stuff around workforce, free training, lots of things coming this year for you. So do sign up to the NYA network. That will make sure you get all the information. Just also say, if you're a network member, in the next few seconds, I suspect, our colleague Laura will be dropping a newsletter into your inbox, giving you the latest guidance information. Stay on this tube, stay on the watch this, don't go away. But we use our NYA network to keep you all up to speed. So sign up to it all. That will be brilliant. Right, let's get us going. So a few things that we say at the beginning of all of our webinars. If you are a member of a national association, there's a few of them on the screen. This is not a definitive list by any stretch. It's worth keeping in touch with your head office, your National Association's HQ. Their website will give you maybe additional guidance, additional measures that you need to take based on the information that the NYA is publishing today, but also in terms of support for you and your type of activity. So do keep an eye on those organisations. They're all following the guidance that we're publishing, but they may take it and they may interpret it in their own way for their own types of activities. Outdoor learning is very different to other types of provisions. So, absolutely follow your National Association's recommendations or requirements, frankly. I say this every time, but the guidance that the NYA publishes is simply for England only. We are the body for England. We don't, so if you're here from any of the other nations, you're very welcome, and thank you for coming and joining us. But the information we're about to give out today only applies to England and not the other nations. So if you're in Scotland, Wales, or Northern Ireland, you need to be following the guidance and advice for those countries as well. It's worth keeping up to date with the latest guidance versions from the NYA. Currently, we're on version 4.2. There's a picture of it here on the screen. You can, if you go to the front page of the NYA's website, big pop-up box pops up and there's a blue button. You can click on there and it will take you straight to the guidance information. We will update this in the next week or so. We will bring all the information together and put it out. But actually, we've already published all the information that you need. So you can find in this version and in our red guidance, you can find the information you're going to need to go forward. All the guidance published by the National Youth Agency is fully supported, endorsed by Public Health England, Health and Safety Executive, and the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, working with the Department for Education and the Cabinet Office. So our guidance is government guidance. It is endorsed and supported in that way, and we go through a rigorous process with lawyers and others to check that we're compliant with all the regulations. So yeah, do use the guidance documents. Please download it from our website. It's really useful and essential. So the big news, I mean, this shouldn't surprise many people, but with the third lockdown announced yesterday by the Prime Minister, unfortunately, we are moving the whole of the UK, the whole of England to our red readiness level from now. So from 1 p.m. today, England is classed as red across the board. And that has some implications if you were in a tier 2, 3 area where you were in amber and you could do slightly more different things and you could provide drop-in services. Unfortunately, open access drop-in provision is now suspended until further notice. But other types of support provision for young people are permitted and can carry on, and I will walk you through that information today. So yes, we're in red, and we now need to follow the guidelines for our red readiness. One thing I want to make, I think, one thing that's really important is between the very first lockdown where there was no youth services permitted and the second lockdown where there was certain, we had, youth sector activity was allowed. The big difference there was schools were open. In the second lockdown, schools were operating, and we've always had this sort of principle working with the government departments, which is if schools closed, then perhaps the youth sector would have to re-close down. The big success this time around is that although schools are closing, the youth sector doesn't need to, and we can continue to operate and support young people. And I think that's a huge success, and I'm very proud of our team. And in the background here, I know she's watching, is the civil servant that works with us tirelessly and works so hard for young people, and a huge thank you to that individual. It's not customary to call out their names, but they know who they are, and they've worked very hard to make sure that today we're able to, even though schools are closing, the youth sector isn't entirely walking away from young people, which is fantastic. So what is available under red? Well, digital, online, any form of virtual support is welcome for all young people. Any young person can access provision that is provided through a digital means. So whether that be Zoom or Teams or WhatsApp groups, what have you, all of that is perfectly safe and appropriate and can be used whilst we're in this red period to contact and engage with all young people. So I know a lot of scout groups that have been in the tier 4 areas, virtual online only, so they've been using Zoom, etc. All of that is acceptable and can be provided. Please make sure your safeguarding policies are up to speed. Please make sure you're confident in doing delivery online. They can pose some different questions and some different issues. Just make sure you're up to speed with that. But actually, we can provide open support for all young people online only. We can provide outdoor and detached youth work. Now, there's often some confusion between the two. There's not a huge amount of difference between the two from our point of view. If you're supporting a group of vulnerable young people, you can do that indoors or outdoors, and I'll come on to that in a second. But also, if you're doing detached youth work, you're out on the streets, you're roaming around, seeing who's out and about, that provision is possible for all young people. You can't control who you're bumping into, who you're meeting. So again, detached youth work is okay. I've got some further slides that are going to cover some of this stuff as well, so we'll go into it in more detail. One-to-one support is okay to provide to young people, but on an invite basis. So you need to invite them to a time and date and location, and you can support young people on a one-to-one basis. That's absolutely fine. And then the big success this time round, which we were concerned that if schools closed, we wouldn't be allowed to offer, is that support groups are allowed to continue. 15 young people plus staff and volunteers this time round is absolutely within the regulations as we understand it. So you can provide group sessions for young people who we recognise as vulnerable, up to 15 of them at a time. We've got to do all the usual safeguarding and all the usual social distancing and safeguarding requirements. We'll come through that as we go through the rest of this webinar, but we are allowed to provide those support groups for young people, which is a great success. So if schools, before, my biggest fear was if schools closed and we had to close youth clubs and youth centres, well, then actually young people would lose access to all face-to-face support. That doesn't need to be the case. So let's talk you through these support groups. So support groups are permitted to meet indoors, but they must comply with the guidance document I was showing at the beginning, the 4.2 version of our guidance. And if you're following that guidance, you've got all the right hygiene, all the social distancing, all the face coverings, all those things in place, and you are working with a group of young people who are vulnerable, then you are welcome to support them and to meet. However, attendees that come must be invite only. So you can't just throw the doors open and run a typical drop-in youth offer. It has to be for a specific group of young people who've been invited to come at a certain date and time. You don't have to have there doesn't have to have a paper invitation, don't have to have a letters or anything. You can, just let them know you're welcome. You're on the list to come in at 4 o'clock on Tuesday, and that'd be fine. But so there's no need to do any bureaucracy around that. But you can't just open and do an open access provision. It has to be support groups for young people who are vulnerable only and on an invite only basis. You can invite them multiple times a week. That's not a problem. But the goal is to try and keep the mixing as minimal as possible. We talk about vulnerable young people, and I get lots of questions about this. So the point of this is the most high need young people in our societies, in our communities, need our support as a sector. And so where it is safe and appropriate to provide that support, we can do, but those only to the most vulnerable young people. Now, I would say to you, the threshold for vulnerable young people in this type of lockdown may be slightly higher than previous, but you will know who your young people are. You know who's more vulnerable than others. You know their needs and what support they may require. And so we do not define nationally a list of definitions of a vulnerable young person. It would be the wrong thing to do, and we very clearly said we will not achieve that. The government's backed us on that decision. You out there know your young people best. You know their family situations. You know their communities. You know what's going on in their lives, and young people's issues and needs change, and you'll be far more effective at identifying who needs support or not than a centralized list that maybe we produced. So it is down to you. You get to choose who's vulnerable. You get to identify those young people. Maybe set yourself a list of criteria. Maybe see who's engaged in your services, who needs that support, and invite them to sessions if you're happy to provide them. But by vulnerable only young people. And if they come with other groups of friends that aren't vulnerable, unfortunately, they can't come in. This is a service, a provision to make sure the most vulnerable young people in our communities are not left behind and are able to be supported. So please take that seriously. Support groups should only really meet if they're really necessary, and I think no more than now, as the virus numbers are rocketing with this new variant. So if the provision doesn't necessarily need to take place, if it could happen virtually, if there are other ways of providing that support, or actually it's a nice to have and it would be lovely to do it, but actually we could skip it for a bit, then maybe consider doing that than just being just trying to open for the sake of it. But for the most high need young people, providing that support is essential. So please do provide that, and you'll be really welcome. But young people are welcome to meet if physically necessary. Keep those sessions as short as possible. They don't need to be 3 hours long. If you can do it an hour, keep it to an hour. If you need, so just think those things through. But we can provide those support groups, which is, as I say, we're really chuffed. Support sessions can take place indoors, between 2 and 15 young people, plus staff and leaders. But you need to make sure you've got all that social distancing in place. 2 meters is what they're now saying. I mean, 1 meter plus is still acceptable by law, but actually aiming for that 2 meters, which makes it a bit harder, is the goal. And please be focusing on that. Make sure all the other hygiene, all the touch points and all the cleaning is absolutely immaculate, because the risk of spreading this new variant is a concern to us. And we can mitigate those things by being really, really rigorous. And I know the sector's been absolutely phenomenal in doing that. And we really thank you. So yeah, we need to make sure we're COVID secure, follow the 4.2 guidance document, and we will be doing okay. So one thing that changed from the last lockdown to this lockdown is that leaders, volunteers and workers are not included in the support group number. So you can have 15 young people plus staff and plus carers if necessary. So if you're running an SEND group or a group that has a key worker to support them, they would not be classed as that bubble of 15, that support group of 15. we've said this every time, that if the groups are getting really large because they've got lots of carers, lots of support workers, or you have a high ratio of staff to young people, then maybe you need to consider splitting your groups into two because it's getting too large. And actually the goal is to have as small a number of meetings as possible, as safe as possible. But we can provide up to 15 young people at a time, plus your staff and volunteers and key workers or support staff alongside. So that's a great success. Ooh, let's do this, right. You are now only allowed one bubble at a time in your venue. So previously, if you had a massive venue and you have multiple front doors or front door and a back door, multiple toilets, you could have provided more than one session. As it stands today, we're not seeing in the legislation where that is now allowed. So we're recommending, as of this point, that only one bubble, one support group at a time in any venue is acceptable. You can have other staff on site. So if you've got staff in the offices and other people doing other work, that's fine. But in terms of the delivery of youth sector activity, it's only one group is all that is allowed. You can provide back-to-back sessions, however. So, you can have a group that meets between 4 and 5 and then give yourself an hour to clean the building thoroughly, and you could run another session, another group 6 till 7. You could have another clean down and run one 8 till 9, 9 till 10 if you wish to, that's all fine. But we need to be really clear that you can provide back-to-back sessions. So please don't think you can only do one session a day. That's not true. If you can clean the building effectively, then you can run more than one session within any given day. So last thing is all public venues that are used by youth sector activities can open. So there is a definition in the current regulations that community centres, which captures youth centres, scout guide huts, village halls, church halls, etc. All those types of venues are allowed and permitted to open to provide access to spaces, to provide your support groups or your one-to-one support for young people. So you can use those. What you can't do, full stop, not allowed under any circumstances, is the use of any private dwelling whatsoever. And if home visits are discouraged under this lockdown, if there is a real need to go and knock on the front door, check on somebody, drop off activities and things, that is permitted, but you need to keep it as short as possible, keep your distance, and you can't go in their house. That is absolutely unacceptable. So if it's absolutely tipping down with rain, I'm really sorry, you're going to get drenched on the doorstep. You can't go in. One of the things that we were able to do in the second lockdown, the November lockdown, was to implement this notion of one-to-one triage support. So the only time you can provide an open access drop-in is to provide a window of opportunity where young people can just turn up on a one-to-one basis to sit down with a youth worker or a leader or a support worker for a purpose of triage. The triage purpose is to understand, does this young person before me, do I need to be inviting them to a support group next Thursday? And because young people's needs come and go and they change, and particularly during lockdown, we're very conscious of this. Because of lockdown, young people's needs may change over the next 6 weeks. I mean, the Prime Minister's saying that we're going to February half term. This could go on longer. But if young people's situations, the stress in their lives, if things are changing, they may become more vulnerable, then you may want to invite them to sessions in the future. You're absolutely welcome to do that, but you must invite them to a one-to-one triage first. And you could do this triage on the streets, you could do it out and about, it doesn't matter. But in terms of using indoor spaces, one-to-one support is permitted and a triage through a drop-in. So you can, you don't know who's going to necessarily drop in to see you, but you might get somebody you've not seen for weeks turns up because they're really desperate and they need help, and you'll be able to provide it, which is fantastic. Make sure your safeguarding protocols are fully in place. I'm quite concerned about safeguarding. It's not as strong as in certain things we're seeing, and not as strong as we'd like to see. Actually, your number one duty of care is around safeguarding young people before the COVID stuff kicks in. So please make sure your safeguarding is absolutely bulletproof and the best it can be. But our goal with the triage support is that no young person should be left behind. No young person should be excluded from support. And so we are able to, allow you to provide triage one-to-one drop-ins to then engage them in a support group later on. Detached outreach is absolutely fine. So what we mean by this is youth workers can, other groups can go out, walk the streets, go down the local park to the shops, see where young people are, and engage those young people where you find them. Now, the relationship is quite different through detached youth work because you're entering their territory rather than them coming into your building and your space, which is your territory. But we know that detached youth work is an essential tool in supporting the most vulnerable young people. And so it is absolutely allowed. And if you bump into a larger, currently the law is one-to-one outdoors, or actually now the law will change to nobody outdoors other than your household. But if you're working, so if you're out on duty, if you like, going out on a session, you are classed as a worker, you are working, and therefore you can go and engage young people as you find them. And if you find a bigger group of them, then you are allowed to go and engage them. Never more than now do we need to be encouraging young people to follow all the rules in terms of social distancing. It's not our job as a sector to police young people. That is the job of the police and their parents. So, our role is to engage young people and support them. So please go and do that. But, we can provide detached outreach work for young people. Oh, gone the wrong way again. So a few bits of additional information. This hasn't changed really from those that have been in tier 4 and red, so I'm sorry if this feels very familiar. I've got a few slides that are a bit different in a minute. Vulnerable young people are permitted to travel. So if a lot of the guidance from government is saying, please don't travel outside your immediate area, your village, your town. But actually, if, I live in Bracknell, but if the support session for young people is in Reading, 10 miles away, young people are permitted to get on the bus and go down there or get a taxi or get transported to that provision and cross borders. For the purposes of accessing youth sector activity, it is all fine. The same applies to workers, volunteers, staff, leaders. You're allowed to travel across borders and boundaries if it's to go and provide that service to young people. So if you need to travel to, the town next door because that's where the scout hut is, or that's where the village hall that you provide your activity is, then you're welcome to do so. The law allows that, as we understand. Venues are allowed to remain open. I've kind of covered this, but only to provide support for vulnerable young people only. So not providing that drop-in, but if venues can open to support vulnerable citizens, and that's the definition. There are no trips, visits, or residentials permitted. I've previously said I don't see this sort of restarting till Easter. I'm getting even more pessimistic. I can't see this starting until probably May half term, maybe the summer holidays if we're lucky. And I know that's devastating news for so many activities. But I think the reality of the moment, the vaccinations are not going to come for younger generations for quite some time, and this may have a further impact. But we don't know yet. We will keep a watch, and we will update the sector as and when we learn more. So all sessions, pre-planned activities under what was our amber guidance are permitted. So this, all your usual sports, you can do cooking, you can do all your kind of games and activities, but you've got to make sure everyone's 2 meters apart. You've got to make sure everything's cleaned. Someone was telling me the other day about, we play basketball group. You can't, if everyone's throwing a ball between people, it's an example we've used in previous webinars, and then if one person's got COVID or a virus or a common cold, they could be putting it on that ball and everyone could pick it up. So you need to adapt your activities so that everyone has their own utensils, their own equipment, their own ball, and you're going to be playing penalty shootouts rather than a proper game of basketball. Football, probably okay if the ball is always kept, below waist height and only kicked, never headed, never picked up. Because if it is picked up or touched, it needs to be, get the alcohol wipes out and wash it down first, so before it can be reused. It's tedious stuff. It's very dull. I'm really sorry, but it is absolutely essential in keeping us all safe. And we said this before, and I think it's worth repeating, but support group sessions should be kept to an absolute minimum. If they don't need to take place, then don't do it. If you can do it online, try and do that. If you want a mix of some face-to-face, some online to minimize the number of sessions, think through these things as you do your risk assessments, as you go through things. But and meetings should be kept as short as possible to be, do the work you need to do, but don't need to be hours and hours long. If you can do it in half the time, then please do. So just as a quick recap, RED allows us to do online and virtual youth sector delivery for all young people, whoever they are, wherever they are. We can provide that support. We can provide detached and outreach youth work. We can do delivery outdoors, but only to vulnerable young people, but detached outreach for all young people is acceptable. One-to-one support for young people indoors is acceptable, or permitted, allowed. Delivery of support groups, there's groups of 15 plus staff, perfectly acceptable for vulnerable young people only indoors. And we can provide our drop-in one-to-one triage support for young people whenever you need to do it. So one of the things that I want to be really clear on, if you read the media and you're looking at the statistics, there's some scary stuff going on out there, and the NYA is not requiring or compelling anybody to do anything. All we're providing is a framework that if you feel comfortable and confident that you can safely provide youth services, youth types activities, then these are the rules of what you're allowed to do, and these are the parameters and the things you need to make sure you've got in place. But we're really, really clear. We are not telling you or requiring anybody to do anything. So if your team don't feel safe, if you don't feel comfortable doing it, if young people don't feel comfortable, their parents aren't feeling comfortable, well then no one from the NYA is demanding or instructing you to go and do anything. If you're being asked to do activities that you don't feel safe or comfortable, then please talk that through with your line manager, your leader. If you're a group of volunteers, then talk it through with your peers. And if you need to get further support from trade unions or others, then they're there to support you. We are not requiring or telling or demanding you to do anything. We're simply saying, if you choose to do it, if you want to do it because you know your young people, you'll feel comfortable that you can support young people safely, these are the rules, these are the things you must take into consideration. And I think as we've moved into this sort of third lockdown with the higher prevalence of the virus, actually being more rigorous with our risk assessments, more rigorous with our reviews, and considering whether we need to provide this service or not is an important thing to be taking into consideration. But please don't think the NYA is instructing or requiring you to open up. If you don't feel safe or it can't be done safely, then please don't do it at all. That's the best thing to do. The other thing, I think, with the higher prevalence of the COVID-19 virus, actually, the government's talking more about shielding individuals, the most vulnerable who could be affected by the virus. And actually, I think we're asking the sector to have a look down your staff list, have a look at your members, consider any healthcare or health risks they may have. And actually, if the virus is now posing a greater risk to them, then maybe think about how you adapt your risk assessments, you adapt your action plans, adapt your activities to make sure those young people, those staff as well, are not put in harm's way unnecessarily. And actually, we're very aware that the workforce of the youth sector is 75% volunteers. Often can be older generations, can be a lot of retired individuals, and those, the virus is unkind to older individuals. It is just a fact. So please take that really seriously. And actually, if your staff team aren't, you might want to provide young people with support. They might be desperate for it, but actually, if it's harmful to your team, please don't do it. Please be really considerate and don't do that. Find other ways to engage young people. But ultimately, the NYA will allow you to operate activities through our guidance, working with Public Health England and the DCMS and others, but be really considerate of those that might be at greater risk during this time. So I just want a quick recap on COVID secure, because this phrase COVID secure is really important. This means your venue, the space, the control of what you're doing is appropriate. So you need to make sure your action plans are fully in place, and that literally has to list out who's got what roles and responsibilities, how you're going to manage things, how you're going to do the cleaning, who's going to take what bit responsibilities on a session. And make sure those action plans are fully reviewed, please. 2021, let's dust off the old one and have another look. Our risk assessments will need to change now. They will need to be considered again. They will need to look at what we need to do. My request there for you to look at those that might need to be shielding or may pose higher risk, or the virus poses a higher risk. Please take a rethink through your risk assessment and make sure that's absolutely the best it can be. Support groups and bubbles are manageable, so you can have up to 15 vulnerable young people in a support group. But do you need to? Can you split it and have a smaller group? Think those things through. The smaller the groups, the less the risk. The shorter the meeting, the less the risk. The goal is to minimize risk. There's a common theme, I'm sure. So hygiene and keeping that hand washing, absolutely, be obsessive. Make sure everyone's washing their hands regularly throughout sessions. If they're touching things, get them to wash their hands. Alcohol, hand sanitizer is great. But actually soap and water is just as effective, if not more effective, if done well. So make sure everyone's got really good hand hygiene. Venues need to be absolutely squeaky clean, and think about all the touch points, the door handles, where do people come and go, where do people regularly touch the same things, light switches, etc. Make sure you're wiping those down, giving them a clean. Equipment, tools, resources, if they're being passed around, then they've got to be cleaned between the next person. So it's very laborious. I'm very aware how tedious this is, but it is what we've got to do this year. Happy New Year. Welcome to 2021. We're still scrubbing door handles, but we're going to be doing this for a little while. So let's get on with it. Face coverings, the rules haven't changed as far as we're aware. So all those aged 11 and over must wear a face covering unless they've got a valid exemption. This includes staff. So if you've got volunteers, workers, unless they've got an exemption, they also need to be wearing face coverings when indoors and outdoors, or when indoors in particular. And outdoors if they're very close together. So if you're doing an activity that people are less than a metre, then they're going to need to be wearing their face coverings. If outdoors beyond a metre, or beyond your 2 metres, then a face covering could be taken off. I mean, ideally it'd be kept on because it will protect them just as well. Social distancing, 2 meters, the guidance is sort of, I read the guidance last night, 2 meters has come back. This 1 meter plus is still there in the background. It's the minimum now, if you like, rather than the norm. 2 meters is the goal. And for those that are over 16, then consider using the Test and Trace app if it's appropriate, and scanning QR codes. All the information's on the NYA's website or in our guidance documentation. So we must make sure these 8 things are all in place to make sure your venue and your activities are well thought through and are safe to operate. You can find all this advice and information on the NYA's website. We have a dedicated COVID guidance hub, and you can find all the information you need there. There is our main guidance, the 4.2. There's also a red document that we've published today. We've updated it today for you, which has all you need to do and think through whilst in red. It kind of pulls those bits out for you. We will, in the next 2 weeks, merge those 2 documents back into one big guidance document around the red readiness for this lockdown. But the guidance document is ready for you to go and access now. Government's asked us to make sure we keep flagging, everybody needs to be doing this, not just at youth sessions, but at home, when we're out and about, being super careful, washing our hands, covering faces, making space. Please make sure you're doing those things and encourage and educate young people. Ultimately, the youth sector, from my point of view, is an educational service, and we've got a role to educate young people to keep them safe. There is specific guidance on detached youth work on our website and on the Federation of Detached Youth Work, their own website. You will find the same guidance on the both of them, which gives you additional information, things to consider if you're going out and about. So if you can't use your venue because of COVID-19, because of this lockdown, and you choose to go out and about on the streets, please read the guidance on our website. You will find it there. It's there to support you. Also, the Youth Work Support website, built with UK Youth, The Mix and others, supported by Erasmus Plus now, which is great. So big thanks to them. The Youth Work Support website has lots of tools, lots of resources, templates, extra information, free training from us, e-learning, all sorts of things that you can find on there. So do go on that website, and it's your single point of access for all things non-guidance in the youth sector at the moment. All the tools, resources you need, you will find it. So whether you're doing some work with young people around mental health, there's resources on there from Young Minds around some of the resources they produce through COVID. So there to help you, free stuff. Just a final plug and a reminder, if you didn't click on our subscribe and give a thumb up and like us or share it, please go and do that now, because that really helps us, and it'd be great. So please go and do that. So I'm going to throw it open to questions. So on YouTube, oh no, too far, go back. On YouTube, you've got the chat section. You can post your questions into there. Abby, our Director of Youth Work, is brilliantly in the background watching, and she's been going through those questions. I'm going to stop sharing the screen so I can bring Abby in. And we will, there she is. Hello, Abby.
Hi.
And then we will answer your questions as best we can as ever.
Yeah, thanks, Lee, and thanks, everybody. I've been feverishly trying to write down as many questions as I can as we go through. There's obviously quite a lot. So the first point is to just say we'll get through as many as we can in the time that we have left. And anything that we don't answer will be covered in the guidance, or feel free to send us an email directly to our guidance inbox, where Lee or I will respond to you within 48 hours. So don't worry if we don't specifically answer your question, there will be another opportunity. So the first question, Lee, or the first point to cover really, is just some clarification around the age range that this guidance covers. So who are we talking about for this guidance?
Yeah, so under the red, there is no under and over 18. So this applies to all age ranges the youth sector works and supports. So the youth sector typically works up to 25. There are some projects that might go a bit higher with specific groups, but this guidance applies to all ages. There's no differentiation at this point between under and over 18. It's the same rules apply to all groups.
Excellent, thank you. So there's been quite a lot of questions around the youth workers and the people delivering services themselves. So the first question that's come up quite a bit is, as key workers are being redefined as critical workers, are youth workers going to be part of that list nationally? And if they aren't, how might we be able to navigate those conversations at a local level?
Sure. So youth workers and most youth sector workers meet the criteria for a key worker, which was the guidance that was. So it had to be a voluntary sector worker doing community activity. So youth workers are key workers, and they, in our view, you are critical workers. And the government has reactivated its lists. And so I spoke last night to the official at DCMS. And they are doubling efforts to make sure that actually youth work is just listed as a specific, but actually you are covered, as far as we're concerned. And the reason the government wouldn't add us to the list as a specific before was because, as far as they were concerned, we met all the criteria, along with lots of other types of sectors who were considered key workers, and therefore they weren't going to amend the list. Now there's a new lockdown. I know there's a new list in the works. We are working, and I was pressing that official hard yesterday to make sure that youth workers and youth sector staff are on that list. But yes, as far as we're concerned, you are a key worker, and you can take it from us.
Brilliant. Okay. So in relation to, again, youth workers specifically, there's been several questions around, can youth workers access lateral flow testing and also vaccinations?
Oh, wow. Okay, so that's not our area of expertise. Lateral flow testing is, schools will be using those and things like that. Your local public health team will be the place to contact to speak to them. They are being given those lateral flow tests, as I understand it, and it's for them to decide where they go and how they get distributed. The priority will be schools when the time comes to reopen those schools, I don't doubt. I know there was one point, there was a plan to put lateral flow tests through everyone's front doors, so every household had a number of them. I don't know where that's got to, but it's not an area the NYA is responsible for, has any expertise or direct knowledge of. And in terms of vaccinations, if you fall into the government's listed its 9 categories of priority individuals for vaccination. If you fall into one of those who are over 75, or you're shielding or have an underlying health condition, well, then you would be in the list to get a vaccination. We have asked for youth workers to be considered for vaccination alongside teachers and social workers, and I know that's in the mix. We don't know what the outcome of that will be at this point, but we've made the case. Made the case for Christmas when vaccinations started becoming a thing. We pushed at that point, and I raised it with the minister directly at our workshop with her, and I know the department is looking at it, but I don't know we have not had any sort of response from that yet. But so the NYA is working to get that through, but I'll be honest, I think that's a long shot. I just think, we'll be really honest, there's lots of people who they want to vaccinate quickly, and we would see ourselves as a priority, but I'm sure every other sector would see themselves as a priority as well. But we've lobbied and we'll continue to press.
Brilliant, thanks, Lee. With regards to lateral flow testing as well, in lots and lots of different communities, that's already started as the community testing initiative. So whether as a youth worker or not, if it's already happening in your community, then I encourage you to just go and use those community.
And that's the public health team. Your local public health team will have got those tests, and if they're rolling it out in the community, then just go and engage with that process and get one there.
Fantastic. Just in relation to public health, while you're talking about that, Lee, one of the questions that came through was related to the local public health teams. The question was about, if your local public health team is really concerned about you still delivering these activities, what takes precedent? Is it this guidance, or is it your local public health team?
Neither is the truth. It's a negotiation, I think, between the two. I can tell you today, we've briefed the Local Government Association. There is a briefing going out to all local authorities this afternoon, which includes our guidance and includes what is permitted and is direct information to chief execs, directors, which will get down to public health officials in those local authorities. And everything I've told you today is what they've been told, is what they're being told as well. So they're being told that youth sector activity under certain these parameters is acceptable, and you should be supporting it if it's safe to do so. So I would point them to the LGA's COVID briefings that they'll have received. But there's no one trumps the other, and I think that's the wrong approach. This is why are they concerned? What is, and then maybe you need to demonstrate to them that you've got the risk assessments, you're following the action plans, you're following Public Health England endorsed guidance, which states this activity is acceptable. And if you've got all your ducks in a row, then have that dialogue. If they absolutely insist you close, I don't know. Maybe you have to do that, but I would be having that engagement with them rather than taking it for gospel.
Brilliant, thank you. In relation to that as well, there were some questions around: do we have templates for an invitation document that could be shared with young people, perhaps, in case they were stopped on their way to a support session, or other templates like risk assessments, etc.? So
there are templates for risk assessments and action plans on the Youth Work Support website. There's a specific COVID guidance page there where you can find those templates. They're on there because they were developed by other partner organisations as well as ourselves. So it's UK Youth did a lot of work on that as well as us. So that's all there to provide you. There's no template at this point for an invitation to attend a session. I think provide, if you feel or they need support, send them a text that says you're welcome to come X, Y, and they can show somebody. If you need to send them an email, maybe that has that information on it. We're trying to keep that bureaucracy to a minimum. Our general experience is if a young person stops and says, "Oh, I'm on my way to this youth project, I've been invited," then they tend to be sort of on your way then, because you're on, if you've seen the wardens out in town centres, they just don't like people lingering in groups. That's what they're there to break up. If you're on your way to somewhere, then you shouldn't be too bothered. I'm sure there'll be cases, there's bound to be examples where that has happened. If that proves to be a massive issue, then I will gladly talk to the minister around arranging for see whether we can publish something as a template from us, but or the government. But at the moment, there isn't a template.
Thanks, Lee. A few questions around who the young people can be. So can we just have additional clarification again around that definition of vulnerable? So who is defined as vulnerable?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is there is no definition of vulnerable, because we don't want to put young people in, we don't want to label young people, too readily, and all young people have different needs at different times. So things that you'll know who's struggling, you will know who may be isolated, who may not have the social networks or the support, who might be feeling down, having poor mental health, may have special needs or additional needs, may living in poverty, and therefore actually when I last ran youth clubs in youth projects, when I was head of services working in Surrey, vast amounts of our budgets in the end were going on feeding young people who were hungry. So actually, if you're recognizing food poverty is a challenge and that's something you would address, well then, they're vulnerable and therefore you can invite them in. The reason we're not providing that defined definition is because you'll know who needs your support most, and you can make that judgment call, not us. So there is no definition, but work out who you think needs your help. And I mean, the truth can be that all young people are vulnerable at a certain threshold. We're all vulnerable as individuals. Things can come and happen to us. If a relative becomes ill and the stress level rises, or you're trying to do virtual online school stuff and you're surrounded by other family members and can't concentrate, and that can really hit your mental health as a young person. We knew from the very first lockdown, at the end of that, the number of young people who would normally engage in youth services trebled from 1 million to 3 million who needed us. So a lot of young people out there who are vulnerable. This lockdown's only going to create more vulnerable young people, unfortunately. And so it's important that we're there for all of them. But you'll know who you need to support.
Brilliant, thank you, Lee. So with relation to different needs for young people, is the rule of 15 always applicable? So the question specifically related to, should that change if you were working with young people who weren't able to manage social distancing? So for example, young people with physical disabilities or specific additional learning needs.
Yeah, so we recognise that some groups work with very young children, they are children at that age, right the way through to young people of all ages. If the young people are struggling with social distancing, then I would say as part of your risk assessment process, you should be considering whether you need to make the group slightly smaller. That's down. There's no requirement in the regulations that I'm aware of that requires you to operate smaller bubbles or smaller groups if individuals are unable to social distance. The biggest question I would have is actually, can I run my session safely? And actually, if these groups of young people can't social distance, then actually should I be opening, or should I just be providing one-to-one support or on virtual online? Because actually they can. I've worked with lots of young people with, say, SEND, lots of special needs young people, and they're amazing, and they have the most amazing time. But actually, you're right. Lots of those young people would really struggle with not being huggy or being tactile, and as a result of that, actually it might not be safe to operate that session. It may not be not be appropriate to open up, or you need to do it in groups of 2 or groups of 4. So I think, again, you will know your young people, you will know your venue, you will know how much room you've got, you'll know how you can lay out furniture and things to kind of create those barriers. And when I say barriers, sometimes having a big table where everyone sits 2 meters around it and sits down to do your activities means that you're kind of imposing social distancing because they're sat down. However, the law and the regulations kind of recognize that, for some young people, particularly some, say, young people with special needs, they might still go and hug each other or get in contact and be tactile. And there's only so much you can do as a practitioner to try and minimize that. So don't beat yourself up if, oh my gosh, they're all touching each other. But actually, if it is happening, then maybe you need to address how you run your session and whether your session operates at all.
Thank you. In relation to that, then, face masks, do young people have to wear face masks for the whole of the session if they're indoors?
Yes. I mean, the same exemptions I think previously applied. So if you're eating, drinking, or playing a sport, team sports, then they can be removed for the purposes of doing that. But I mean, literally, if you're wearing a mask, you should take it off, take a drink, put it back on again. We're not you take it off and sit at a coffee table and leave it off for an hour whilst, with a glass of water in front of you, artificially suggesting they're having a drink. This virus is getting nasty. So, it is literally take it off, take your drink, put it back on again. If they're I don't know, playing a team game or a sport in a sports hall, or then it could come off for the duration of that. But the goal is to keep them on all the time. Again, there are good exemptions. There's certain health reasons why they can't be worn. That's hopefully applicable. They don't need to show you a card. They don't need to demonstrate why that is. You can take them at their word for it. But yeah, and again, if you're outdoors, they don't need to be worn outdoors. Just like if you're going for a walk around the park, you don't need to wear a face mask. But actually, if you're doing an activity outdoors and you're going to be within 2 meters of each other, then face coverings should be worn.
Thank you. Okay, so lots and lots and lots of questions about the types of activities that we might be able to offer. So a couple of different themes to explore. One is around the provision of food and drink, both to consume within an activity and also to take away, related specifically to that being like a vulnerability or food poverty type concept. And also lots and lots of questions about fitness type activities and sports type activities and whether they can/should still take place. So could you address those two, please?
Yes, again, in terms of those sports activities, I would be thinking really, really carefully, what are the types of activities that you're going to provide? So you've got to think about how they might touch equipment, how they might, interact with each other. So if their young people are going to be bashing into each other, then I wouldn't be doing it. If they're going to be sharing equipment, then I'd be thinking of a different way of achieving it. And the thing for me as I'm an educator, as a youth worker, that was my job. And are there other ways in which I can achieve the same goals and outcomes in a safer way? Now, don't get me wrong, I know young people will turn up, the lad will turn up with a ball and they're desperate to kick it around and play football. But you've got to be really, then you can do it, but you've got to put rules in place. They can't touch the ball between them, they can't head it, they can't handle it, they can only kick it. And if it is touched, it's got to be cleaned, and it gets boring. But those are the sort of things that have got to be put in place. But actually, in terms of types of activities, is there another way of achieving the goals that you've got without needing to take the risk? And there are multiple ways in which that could be done. So rather than doing cookery in a kitchen? Could they be making sandwiches and it's all laid out in front of them and they've got their own utensils and they're making their own sandwiches, rather than trying to make a big, group of people trying to make a big spaghetti bolognese? I'm making this up on the fly, but you get the point. Adapt your activities and avoid doing certain activities if that means you can't socially distance or you can't put the right hygiene in place.
So it's reframing the thinking around that, rather than can I do this sport activity? It's can it work safely? And if
Exactly.
not, what should I do instead?
Spot on, yes.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, we've had some questions about bubbles. So if young people are attending school still, so under the vulnerable or critical worker, and they're in a bubble at school, are they then still allowed to potentially attend youth work support provision?
Yeah, that's fine. So if you've got multiple young people coming to your support group who are in a bubble at school, try and keep them together. Try and keep the school bubble and your group together. But no, actually, if they there's no requirement on us to keep those support groups in line with school bubbles, because when I ran youth clubs, young people might come from 3 or 4 different schools to our provision. You're going to have to mix them up. It's the way it works. So that's all perfectly acceptable. I guess our goal is to minimise the number of individuals a young person gets into contact with. So if you can keep them with even partially their school group, then perfect. That would be best practice, I would say. But they can be in a separate group when they're with you than when they're at school.
Excellent, thank you. Some questions about bubbles and one-to-one now. So if you are operating a bubble, so a support group at that time, are you also allowed to run one-to-ones within the same venue at the same time if you're using multiple rooms?
No, you're allowed one provision at a time. So you can have a one-to-one session for a young person, or you can have a support group going on. You can't have the two.
If you had one group of 15 young people, but you split them down into 3 groups of 5 that were operating in different rooms within the building, is that acceptable?
Yeah, because you've still got your maximum of 15 young people in the space at any one time. They might be in different rooms doing slightly, you might split them into 3 groups to do make a paper towel or something, and you put them into 3 different spaces to do it, or they could be doing completely different activities. That will be fine, but you can't go above your bubble, your support group of 15 young people in your venue at any time.
What about if you had interconnected buildings, so they were separate buildings?
Well, if it's 2 buildings with a link bridge or something, then it's 2 buildings, and therefore that's 2 venues. Therefore, there could be one group in one and one in another. Okay. But if it's be really clear that it is 2 very separate. So I ran a project that had a youth centre at one end and a library at the other, and there was a wall down the middle, and it was a shutter down the middle. Actually, you could have had a group. There are 2 venues. There are 2 spaces. There are 2. There's a library venue and there's a youth club venue. You could run one in each if you could get away with it. But the goal is to be sensible and not try and bend the rules just to be able to do more than you should.
Thank you.
I don't doubt this sector will be amazingly responsible when it comes to applying that.
Thank you. So triage and support for young people. You talked about one-to-one support, either as drop-ins, like sort of triage, or individualized support. What about if you needed to have 2 staff to 1 young person? Would that be acceptable from a safety?
That's fine. That's not a problem. So, there are cases where even if you're doing one-to-one, you should have a second worker nearby at least for safeguarding purposes. So, if you needed 2-to-1, that's fine. But it's only 1 member of the public coming to your activity at one time. That's in that one-to-one scenario.
Thank you. And so, what about if you need to transport young people to attend a session? How does that work?
Yeah, the rules haven't changed. So young people can travel, and you can arrange that travel for them. They can get a bus, train, they could walk, they could cycle, they could get a taxi. You could drive them as well if you've got the right safeguarding, appropriate safeguards in place. The goal is to make sure the young person gets the right support they need. Think through your risk assessment around that travel. So if you're choosing to put them in your vehicle, then you know they need to sit in the back. You know, they all be wearing face coverings. Open the window a little bit. You know, wash hand sanitizer in and out. All those things. Make sure those things are really robust. But it can all be done. The goal is to make sure young people get support. And if we have to transport them places, then that's what we have to do. You can get a minibus and put them all on a bus if you need to. Again, hand sanitizer, open the windows, face masks, coverings, spread them out as much as you can, really.
Thank you. Lee, there's been a question around youth workers continuing their training. Now, there's been lots of questions around university and formal qualifications and what needs to happen for placements, which I know the Education Training Standards Committee are working on some guidance around that today. So anybody that's interested in those specific questions, we should have some information for you within the next couple of days. But this is more around like CPD. So if you were a youth centre manager, for example, and you'd got a team of staff that needed to update their safeguarding training or similar, is that still allowed? Yeah,
I think it is. I think under the rules, because it's classed as work, so people can go to work. You know, although the new guidance from the Prime Minister last night was, if you can stay at home, then stay at home. So I would be asking myself, do we need to do this training now? Could we wait 6 weeks and do it at the end of February once we're out of this lockdown, and assuming that happens? Could we do it online? Could we do it via Zoom, so we don't need to get face-to-face, or via Teams, or whatever system you wish to use? But I think you can get, I don't see anything in the regulations I read, or the information I've read so far, that says that staff teams couldn't come together for the purposes of training or a meeting. My question is, in the next 6 weeks, how essential is that to be done, and could you delay it? And if you could delay it or do it in another fashion, then I would absolutely take that route.
Okay, thanks, Lee. Okay, we've had some really interesting questions actually around work experience, volunteering and social action. So if young people are engaging in work experience or volunteering, then, and it's within essential sectors, is COVID secure? Is that allowed to still continue?
I would want to check, is the truth. So if they're volunteering for your youth project, then yes, it's allowed to continue, because they're a junior leader, for example. That is absolutely appropriate, because they're a member of staff, and they would actually count as a staff member, not your group of 15. I'm not sure what the advice is around generic work experience information. It's not our area of expertise today, but we can certainly try and find out. Whoever's asked that question, we'll take your details down, and we'll try and get back to you with an answer.
Yeah, there's been a couple of questions actually. That's why I was quite surprised. It's quite interesting that that's.
I haven't seen anything yet from the Department for Work and Pensions for the Kickstart programme. Obviously, that's starting to kick in. So I think if young people are on placement or within a placement, and the employer is happy to continue, then that would make sense to be allowed to continue, because you're still effectively a worker. You're going to work. It's experience. You're not necessarily getting paid. Or an internship or whatever. I think all those things are still permitted. There might be some nuanced specialist bits which we're not clear on, but we can check.
Thanks, Lee. Just going back to this notion of home visits again, just want to do some real clarification again around that. What are the rules around doorstep visits? Just some clarification around home visits if young people live in supported accommodation or care homes.
Sure. Okay. So the basic understanding is you're not allowed to enter any private dwelling. So you could go to a doorstep, you could talk to somebody at the garden gate, as they call it, the end of their driveway or wherever. You could go for a walk. But you're not allowed to be out in public with your people anymore. So you can't, although we as youth workers doing a detached session could. So it would be an interesting one. I would be saying, I will be here. You could meet me and we could have a conversation. And I've worked with young people who can't even leave their front door. So, actually, you can visit their home to drop resources off, but you shouldn't linger. You should literally say, hi, I hope you're okay. Here's your box. See you on Teams or Zoom. keeping that to an absolute minimum is the response. You won't be finding people knocking on doors, doing door-to-door sales and things like that. It's the same thing. We shouldn't be going around and providing that. We get a lot of questions on our inbox around, oh, can I provide this project from my kitchen or in my garage, or I've got a really big garden? The answer is no, absolutely not allowed under any circumstances. And there are some very specialist youth projects that work with young people through the home. And again, they are, it is acceptable to visit, to drop things off, to have a very brief conversation, but not hang around.
Thanks, Lee. Some questions around the use of public and community buildings. Mm-hmm. What happens if the building has been closed? So if it's a community building that you would usually use, but it's been closed, what should we do?
So it's down to the venue owner. So if you want to reactivate that venue, then you need to speak to the landlord or whoever owns that venue and engage them in a conversation around, tell them what you want to do, tell them that you're following our advice and guidance, show them your risk assessment, your action plan, and if they're comfortable that they can open safely. I know of certain community venues where the insurance, they've got concerns around insurance. You might need to help them look into that, but ultimately it's their venue, not ours, or yours. So you need to work with the landowner and see what they will allow you to do. And unfortunately, if they fundamentally say we're not opening, then you're stuck. You won't be able to use that, and try and see whether you can use other venues or do delivery in another way. But you're welcome to show them our guidance. You're welcome to show them this webinar, where we talk about, community venues are permitted to open for the provision of providing youth support for vulnerable individuals. That includes youth sector activities. So, you're welcome to sort of talk them through it and show it to them, and hopefully they'll let you do it.
Thank you, Lee. Questions just still popping through around one-to-one walk and talk. So being outside with a young person, providing one-to-one support.
Yeah, so walk and talk would be fine because you're a worker at work and you're doing a job. So it's your professional interaction, if you wish. You can be a volunteer, but still providing a professional interaction with a vulnerable young person. Only vulnerable young people. You can't walk and talk with all young people, anybody. It could only be those you would identify as vulnerable. So I've seen examples where young person who can't, won't leave their front door. The thing that we were doing was eventually we did get that young person to walk around the block with us, as part of the youth work intervention. Highly vulnerable, very, really high need young person. That would be perfectly right because you're out doing a detached session and you're engaging those young people. You're providing a one-to-one. You're potentially still providing that one-to-one support, but you're not doing it in a building or in a venue, and that's fine. You can still provide your one-to-one support on a park bench. You just can't, provide a two-to-one service, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Thanks, Lee. Couple of questions because we're nearly out of time, or last couple of questions rather. There's been a few questions around multi-agency delivery and multi-agency working and what advice we might have around that at the moment.
Yeah, so I think the youth sector has been, great history of working with partners and agencies to get around young people and provide the right collective support. None of that should cease in my view, that if you're supporting a vulnerable young person, they're likely to be on the radar of a number of agencies. What you can't do is, like in the old days, get in a room and have a chat about them, hopefully with them there. And so, what you can do is, still engage those agencies, keep them up to speed. If a young person is coming to your project, then I'd let the school know, I'd let some of those other agencies know, with that young person's permission, in the right way, with the right, safeguards and protocols. Follow your GDPR, folks. But, because actually you're there collectively to support that young person. But so if you would engage with other partners, you don't let that stop. The worst thing we could do, we'd let young people down by stopping some of that partnership collaboration now.
Thanks, Lee. Okay, so last couple of questions then, again, just for clarification.
Sure.
You're running a session, you've got a bubble, but you've only got 10 young people in it. Is it okay to then deliver one-to-one support to make it up to 15 elsewhere in the building?
Yeah, that's kind of bending the rules, isn't it? Yeah, technically that would probably fit, but I wouldn't like to see it happening.
Thank you.
We've got to follow the spirit of what we're trying to achieve here, not bend the rules left, right and centre. But technically it's allowed.
It's coming back to that point that you made earlier on, isn't it, about looking at how we can do what we need to do in the safest possible way rather than make the rules fit what we want.
Exactly.
Which, you know, again, another question. So if you're doing 1-to-1 outside, but you need to do 2-to-1 in terms of safeguarding support, that would be acceptable as long as it's within the realms.
So 2 staff to 1 young person is perfectly acceptable. What you can't do is 2 young people to 1 or 2 workers. Unless that way you're creating a support group, and then you're going to have to set a definition of a time and place and go and do that. So it's the difference between a support group and a 1-to-1. Anything above 1 young person. So I had a really long set of conversations with the government when the previous lockdown were kicking in, because I was saying, well, actually, you know, I've worked with young people who would really need my support, but actually need one of their friends to come with them as moral support for them to be able to sit down and talk them through, particularly young people who have been through some significant trauma. They want their best friend to sit there and hold their hand. And actually the rules won't allow that. You know, the rules do not allow that. So the only way around that is you're running a dedicated support group for those young people to come and have that session. But it's playing semantics with the rules. So you can provide a 1-to-1, but that could be 2 staff to 1 young person, that's fine. Or a support group of 2 or more young people.
Thanks, Lee. And doorstep visits then, just real crystal clear about that. Once more, just for the record.
So you can knock on the door, you can drop stuff off, you can say hello very briefly, but you can't linger.
Thank you. Has the guidance changed at all for detached and outreach work from the Federation, do we know?
So no, we've slightly updated some of the wording on language, but the general gist of it is exactly the same, and that sort of covers you the key things you just need to consider and take through. We will review that guidance with the Federation of Detached Youth Work now, to make sure it's fit for the next few weeks. But yeah, I think as far as I'm concerned, when I remember reading it a while ago, it's fine.
Brilliant, thank you. I think that probably covers the majority of the questions that have come through. The rest of them I would suggest are probably covered in the general guidance document and in the key points that are made. So thanks so much for that, Lee.
No, that's great. Thank you everybody for watching. We've had one question, which is, I think a few people are asking if we can share these slides. I've said before, we will not share the slides. The reason being is the words that I put across and Abby puts across, the context that we're able to talk through those slides is really important. What you're welcome to do is use the YouTube video and just put it on pause if you want to show it to people and scroll through and find the next page and then do it that way. We are not publishing the slides because we'd rather they watch the video, we'd rather people recap on this stuff than take our slides out of context, and that's really important, particularly as this is sort of legal guidance that fits with national law. So I'm really sorry if people get frustrated that we won't publish the slides. We're not going to be doing that, but you can, again, as I say, you can watch it all again on YouTube and you can stop, pause and still see the screen. So I hope that's a workaround for you. Our sector likes workarounds. Abby, thank you so much for your time. Alex, Laura in the background and the team behind us, brilliant, great work again. Thank you for everyone joining us. Click subscribe, give us a thumbs up. I hope this has been really helpful. We are here for the whole sector. So if you've got questions, if you're not feeling comfortable, use our guidance inbox, which is so guidance@nya.org.uk. And it's typically Abby or I will reply to you as quick as we can. We are here to support you. As things change, as things evolve, we will run further webinars. There's going to be some regional specific versions of this, which we've already agreed to do. And I'm sure there may be some others. We might try and do another one with UK Youth if there's a demand for it. We will gladly provide time to support that. So yeah, thanks for what you're doing for young people. Please stay safe. Please be really, really careful in terms of what you're doing. Make sure your risk assessments are really, really robust. Think through what activities you're doing. Think through whether you need to provide your services at all. But if you do, follow our guidance and you'll be absolutely fine. And thank you for everything you're doing with young people. I think from Abby and I, Happy New Year. And let's hope 2021 improves as we get through it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.